So with that being said, we're going to get started here. We're going to be talking about performance income, publishing income, and other parts of the musical composition royalty right, how it looks, what to consider, how they differ for the different listings you see on Royalty Exchange. And we hope that that builds confidence. So first, let's talk about composition copyrights. So typically split into two sections here, the writer income and the publishing income. As you can see from this graphic here, they include different royalty types. For writers, songwriters, normally it's just the public performance, and then publishers will earn from the public performance, sync placements, as well as mechanical royalties. So this composition side, this is as opposed to the sound recording side, or what you would consider the masters. So this is the publishing rights versus the master's rights. If you have ever heard those terms, this is kind of what we're referring to here. So we have another good graphic here that kind of represents how these royalty types transfer to the rights holders. So on the left, you see we have our royalty types, performance, sync, mechanical royalties. In the center here, we have our different rights types. So performers' rights organizations, publishing and admin companies, and mechanical rights organizations, and that all feeds down to our rights holders. So we'll talk a little bit about these organizations. PROs, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, ASCAP and BMI, we get a lot of those listings on the exchange. It's performance royalty. Straightforward. It splits into two shares, one for the songwriter and one for the publisher. As you know, indicated by the arrows here, one goes directly from the PRO to the rights holder, and another share goes from the PRO to the publishing company, which then can get paid out again to the rights holder, depending on the splits and whatever agreement they have. And we'll talk about publishing companies a little bit and how those splits can work. Now for sync placements, shopping, that's overseen by the publisher. They'll field the offers or shop the catalog around, and then that revenue gets passed on to the rights holder, again, based on the agreements that they have in place. And then, of course, our mechanical royalty, which we've talked a lot about in the last year. So this gets collected by both the publishing companies as well as mechanical rights organizations. The Mechanical Licensing Collective would be a big one that we work with. Harry Fox Agency, they are another. We don't work with them, but they exist in this space and are, very, very prominent. Dayton, Rob, anything you guys want to add and expand upon with this flow chart kind of before we move on here? Rob, maybe pub companies.
I think just to kind of frame the context of what we're talking about here is we're going to end up looking at how a songwriter's income that comes from their performance rights organization compares to their income that comes from their publisher, which collects all three of these different types as well. So kind of think about how the royalties are going to be flowing to one person, but coming from a couple of different entities that encapsulate some different types of royalties.
Cool. So let's talk about what distinguishes the two here. So when we're talking about publishing royalties here, we are talking about what the publisher collects, so the performance, sync, and mechanical. So there are a lot of strengths to this share of the royalties, in that it is inherently diversified because it has a lot of these different rights types that flow to it. It also incentivizes the publisher. They have a vested stake in the success of the IP, and so rights holders get to enjoy the benefits of the work of those publishers through rights that they own. That's really important for Royalty Exchange because what we are buying here are passive interests. So the strength of the publisher, their incentive to have the IP succeed helps you a lot. And publishers are good at what they do. Now, it's also important that we talk about copyright reversion and what that is specifically, because that is a risk you could potentially face with publisher's share of an asset, depending on how it came to the publisher. It's not often something that we'll face with royalty exchange assets, but still something that we wanted to highlight here. Rob, can you talk to us about the copyright reversion laws and how they apply to royalty assets specifically?
Yeah, so in the US at least, a creator has the right to terminate an assignment of copyright 35 years after that assignment takes place. It's something they affirmatively have to do. You have to file notices to claw those rights back. And the way that that would affect an asset on royalty exchange is if our seller is the publisher, and the only way that they earn royalties is because they have had a songwriter assign the copyright to the publisher, which creates the publishing agreement, and then based on the splits of the royalties, then the publisher gets to collect a certain share of royalties. Now, in the US, the songwriter would have the opportunity to terminate that assignment. So if the publisher is earning royalties for 35 years, there's a chance that their ownership of the copyright could be terminated, which would remove their ability to collect royalties. So in those cases, we will always make a note on the listing saying, hey, the seller's interest is based on an assignment of copyright, which the underlying songwriter may have the right to terminate. Now, what differentiates that from the vast majority of deals that happen on royalty exchanges, if we're selling publishing royalties, most of the time it's the songwriter's share. So the songwriter will be selling their share of royalties to an investor on the royalty exchange platform. It does not include the copyrights, since most likely they have already assigned at least a portion of the copyrights to their publisher. So this termination risk would not apply if a songwriter is selling their songwriting royalties or publishing royalties to an investor on royalty exchange, because there was no copyright involved in that sale, and thus no potential for termination of the actual sale on royalty exchange.
Right. And then, like we said, publishers selling on royalty exchange is exorbitantly rare. I mean, that's what their business model is to shop that music, and they are good at it. We're actually going to look at an example of, the impact that a solid publisher can have on earnings. We'll look at that next. So this is a catalog that's sold on royalty exchange. If you wanted to go look at it, it is asset 4686. It's the Grits catalog that's sold. So this is a perfect example of the value that a publisher adds to a royalty asset. So you see this big red line we put in the middle of these earnings. This is when Cobalt, which is a publishing admin company, began overseeing these royalties. Prior, it was a small-time publisher. I think they were called, I think it was Moon and Muskie, if I'm remembering correctly. Small-time publisher. As you can see, the earnings were low and really lumpy. Once Cobalt took over, however, now you have consistent earning and increasing royalties as they kind of get up to speed with where to collect and, just getting control of the IP. These right 4 bars, this is what you would expect from a solid publisher for an old, regularly listened to catalog. This is like a $20 age catalog or something really, really high. But I mean, the proof is clear. Cobalt takes over, suddenly the earnings are consistent at a regular level. And that's what you want when looking at these publishing assets. So you have a wider funnel with, performance, mechanical, and sync. You have a whole company overseeing the success of the IP. A lot of good that comes from these publishing rights. So with all that being said, this is how things split out for performance royalties specifically, which is the songwriter side. So for the writer share, if you see something that's songwriter share on royalty exchange, normally it's just the performance. With the publishing, it can be a lot. Dayton, Rob, anything that you guys want to add to this before we get into the charts?
Yeah, so these are the royalties that you see that are coming from ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. These are performance rights organizations royalties, and they are the entities that are tasked, at least in the US, with collecting public performance royalties, which is one specific type of royalty, and paying those through to the songwriters and publishers. And they're by definition split. The royalties come in, 50% go to the songwriters and 50% go to the publishers. And we'll probably see here in a minute that some of those royalties that are paid to the publisher ultimately flow down to the writer as well, based on their publishing agreement.
Right. And those publishing agreements can vary quite a bit. We'd like to say, like Rob said, the 50-50, but we've seen them all over the place. Okay, let's get into some earnings examples here. So we're going to look at 2 catalogs that sold on Royalty Exchange with the same track list, one of which was the publisher share and one of which was the songwriter share. So it's a pretty close apples to apples comparison of the royalties, except for the fact that they're different royalty types. So we're going to see how they kind of speak to one another, I guess, let's put it. But you'll see a lot of similarities in trends, and how, like, for example, a sync can impact royalties in performance, and really see the strength of each side of the royalty shares. So Dayton, can you tell us about these 2 charts that we're looking at here, and really the key factors that we want to focus on when comparing the performance to the publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have here is a fairly typical example, I think, of the kind of asset that you might see on the exchange when a seller is putting up in separate transactions their writer side and their publisher side. On the left-hand side in these charts that we're going to take a look at for a few of these, we've got the royalties that are paid out by the publisher. In this case, we've also called out a couple of really high value payments relating to specific music users, just to draw emphasis. On the right-hand side, we've got the royalties paid over the same 3-year period that are coming to the writer from their PRO, in this case, ASCAP. And a couple things we want to point out, similarities and differences between these 2 different streams of income. You'll notice for the publisher royalties, those are paid on a semi-annual basis. For this particular asset, the publisher is paying out a royalty every 6 months. It has the effect of generally making these payments a bit lumpier, and obviously they're a bit more spaced far apart. Whereas for the PRO ASCAP, we fit this into a quarterly distribution schedule. ASCAP is unique in that they pay out 8 times a year. They separate out their domestic and international royalty distributions, but you can roughly consider it as a quarterly distribution schedule. 4 payments coming in a year, and you can see that the gradient is a lot more smooth. That trend coming down is smoother over time. You can also see in this, there are some differences between the types of royalties that you can expect to get paid out on the pub side and on the writer side. This asset we're looking at here is a country music catalog. It's also unique in that it has gotten a number of significant sync placements, and you can see those that we've highlighted for NBC Universal Media and for Cinema Street Pictures LLC paid out on the pub side. That gold bar in the first half of the prior 12-month period and the red bar in the second half 12-month period, those sync royalties clearly drive the value of those particular distributions and really represent the most significant payments that we have for the publisher over that past 3-year period. Now, for the writer side, what you're going to see is a somewhat different mix of royalties paid out for public performance. That sort of teal green bar starting in the past prior 12-month Q1 period, those are country radio royalties. And for country music catalogs, those can be especially valuable royalty payment type from the PRO, given the way that they can potentially credit high value tracks that come through in those distributions. Also, something which is typical of country music catalogs, you can see that radio royalty quickly peter out. Unlike other genres of music, country radio, that is especially fickle, the way that those songs can move up and down the charts. So you see that radio royalty paying out pretty quickly and dropping to pretty close to near zero, and that the rest of the catalog is supported by a lot of the value of the streaming royalties over time, with this sort of notable exception, I think, for country music. You've got these two gray bars in the PTM Q4 and LTM Q1 period that relate to royalties paid by Dish Network. Now, this can be something where you see the effect of a sync placement on the publisher side, and then a corresponding royalty paid for performance on the writer side. We don't have enough data to verify that that Dish Network placement, that usage there ties to either one of these syncs, but it stands to reason that a sync placement is leading to that Dish Network royalty getting paid through. So it's not representing quite the same value in terms of like a total share of royalties on the writer side for the performance. But again, it's a significant placement, especially for a country catalog where you're not necessarily expecting to see those kind of syncs come through and the subsequent performance royalty getting paid out for a TV usage. A lot of countries, supported by radio and streaming. This is pretty notable, and something that you can see kind of like a, payment for the sync on one side, performance payment on the other side coming a little bit later on.
Okay, great. Next slide here. By income type.
Yes, and this I think is something that we've been touching on a number of times in this presentation, and we're trying to drive home with this here. On the left-hand side, we've got the royalties paid by the publisher. On the right, we've got the PR royalties paid by ASCAP. Interesting case with this particular catalog, where the performance side of the royalties are not part of the royalties that are getting paid out by that publisher. For whatever reason, the writer-seller has made an arrangement such that their publisher performance royalty is excluded from the income that is getting paid through to them by their publisher administrator. So they may have that money getting routed to a different account. They may have it going to a separate entity. You would be able to verify that if you went into the repertory for ASCAP and search the particular work, see where that money is meant to be streaming. But in this case, we don't see a performance royalty getting paid through by their publisher. Instead, we just see the publisher only royalty income streams, the synchronization in red and the mechanical royalties in blue. Now, the sync we already touched on a little bit. Those are large one-time outlier payments that can drive really significant value and potential upside for a catalog, but they're not necessarily something that you can count on. When we're doing evaluation for these kind of assets in the exchange, we want to try to exclude the sync from being a major driver of value for most catalogs, given the sort of inconsistent nature of those kind of performances. But you do see that there's this pretty clear trend over time with the 3 years in the mechanical side in blue, where the first half past prior 12-month payment is about 10K, trending down to about 5K over a 3-year period. And that trend decline you see represented like almost to the same degree of percentage decrease on the performance side. In Q1, the past prior 12-month period, it's looking about like a little over like 10,500, 11,000, trending down to about 5,000, the most recent quarterly payment in the last 12-month period. So you do see that decline mirrored between the mechanical performance, which stands to reason because mechanical is primarily driven by performances of a repertory in a streaming context. There can also be some kind of mechanical royalty paid out for sales of physical album units, but I think for a lot of catalogs, you're going to see most of the mechanical royalty be generated by the streaming mechanical payment. And those are plays on Spotify, on Apple Music. That per play payment is going to be reflected in terms of trend the same way between the mechanical royalty and the performance royalty.
Yeah, the similarities are definitely notable, and it speaks to a question we get often, which is better to buy, songwriters or publishers shares? And they're pretty similar, aside from little upside things here and there. The earnings are largely correlated.
Similar here, but one other thing for us to consider when looking at these kinds of assets, if you're talking about mechanical, we put out a lot of information about the changing CRB rates.
Yep.
Obviously, that's only going to hit the mechanical side, right? What the CRB rate decisions for retroactive payments for the prior 5 years for increased rates on a go-forward basis, that only applies to mechanical. You're not going to see that reflected the same way in the performance payout. So investors who hold these kind of assets over like the next 5 years, you're likely going to see a growing delta between the value of the streaming mechanical and the performance for the same catalog over time.
All right, and then last examination slide here is by track, which has some interesting story to it. Dayton?
Yeah, this is reinforcing a lot of the same stuff that we've already covered with the music user and income type breakdowns, because what we can see here between these different sides of this particular asset, the big red bars that we have on the publisher side, that's a track brand new. That's that track that is getting placed for these sync opportunities, right? The amount of payment in the past 12 months, first half and second half period, that lines up with those significant sync payments that we saw. And that is pretty typical in the music industry. Tracks that have been synced are probably more likely to get synced again than a track that hasn't been synced. There's some quality to that track in terms of the sound, the lyrical content, the mood, the overall vibe of the track that fits with something that music supervisors are looking for when they're trying to put a song into a commercial or into a TV show or film. Something about that track has that kind of quality they seek out, so they're more likely to keep putting it in. So you see the value of that reflected on the publisher side for that particular song. On the writer side, we coded brand new to that same color, that sort of dark red in those trends. And you can see the value of that increase over time, along with those dish network payments, those TV usages that we had called out earlier on a couple slides ago. It grows in value over time, not nearly to the same degree as what you see on the publisher side. And once the likely value of those sync payments has come through, those one-time payments for one-time usages in many cases, you can see the value of that brand new track decrease pretty significantly. It's still one of the top earners in the catalog, but it's not generating as much to the same degree in Q4 of the LTM period as it was in the Q1 LTM period. You can also see here, there's the effect of the radio that we see, that orange for Better Off Gone. We called out the country radio royalty driving value, but something that gets paid through pretty quickly over time. You see that in the PPTM period in Q1 and Q2, that orange bar driving about half the value of the distribution in PPT and Q1, quickly declining down to a small overall contributor of the total earnings.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important to note the closer correlation between the performance royalties and the sync placements that happen. Right, it's notable that really both sides can get impacted by those kinds of placements. Okay, so to round out all of this data that we just threw at you, the writing versus the publishing. The writing side, quarterly payments, often. Only the performance. But then there are also high value plays that can contribute to that. And that's things like radio, the dish network stuff, streaming audio, etc. And then for publishers, the foreign sub-publishers. Dayton, can you talk to us about what that point is referring to specifically? This is a little bit of a nuance of performance royalties.
Yeah, sure. We haven't really seen this expressed in the data for the examples that we had called out, but something to bear in mind with assets on the pub side for the performance royalties that are getting paid out. If you were to look at a writer asset at ASCAP, by way of example, what you'd likely see is a split of domestic and foreign royalties. If you were to put up the ASCAP distributions for the same catalog for the pub side, what you would likely see is roughly equivalent amount paid out for the domestic royalties, whereas you likely see a significantly reduced amount paid out for the international royalty. And that is due to the effect of foreign sub-publishers. Sub-publishers, that's a common arrangement in the music industry where a publisher has an agent collecting on their behalf in foreign territories. So rather than the money in that foreign territory being collected by the foreign PRO, whatever the society is in that particular country, having that money then get transferred over to the domestic PRO in the US, who then processes that payment, that money never leaves that territory. It's collected by the foreign PRO and then paid out by a foreign publisher representing that asset in that particular territory. That's basically standard, I think, for most major catalogs, most of the major assets you'd look at on the exchange, that you'd have a foreign sub-pub collecting on behalf of a publisher in another territory. But it's something to bear in mind if you had any questions about the value of royalties that are coming through, if you happen to look at the same catalog for a writer and publisher asset.
Yeah, so again, nuance for sure. Now, the publishing side, as we saw, semi-annual payments, mechanical and sync. In many cases, performance is also included there. In the examples we showed here, it wasn't. Has the strength of individual syncs, and that's just the direct payment of the sync license. That would be what was included there when we include sync. But as we saw in the data, those earnings do eventually flow through the performance side as well, but just maybe not at the same level that the actual sync includes. And then things like, Peloton settlements, stuff like that, which we noted in one of the first slides, that can also be part of the publishing as well. Dayton, anything you want to add to the publishing side here?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So let's do a recap of composition stuff. Dayton, I'll let you just wrap us all up here since you took us through the data here.
Yeah, sure. Just to kind of touch on one more time the points that we're trying to drive home with what we've been covering in this deck before, with the composition royalties. When we talk about the diversification of these kinds of assets, the publisher side does win out over the writer side, right? If you're looking at a catalog for publishing royalties on the exchange, almost certainly the case that you're going to see represented in that catalog mechanical royalties, sync royalties, and public performance royalties, and the different music users that are getting paid out by those various within those various income types by the distributions paid by the different distributors. On the mechanical side, MLC, HFA; on the publishers, any of the major publishers, any independent publishers; and for the performance, the PROs that are based in the US, and occasionally PROs that are based in other countries that we're representing those assets for, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC in the US. That touches on the distributor piece too. Understanding the different distributors that could be paying a royalty, what rights do they represent? Also bearing in mind what schedules they're paying out for those royalties. Let's say you have an asset for writer royalties that was paid out by ASCAP for second quarter 2022 performances. If you want to get that equivalent publisher payment that is being collected by an administrator and then being paid to the publisher, there could potentially be a lag. between when ASCAP makes the payment to that publisher processes that payment and then makes a subsequent distribution after they've collected their own admin fee. So something to consider with that. There might be a difference in timing in terms of when royalties are collected and paid out, depending on the distributor, even if you're looking for the same catalog. The different rights types that we've talked about, performance, sync, and mechanicals, and understanding the role of publishers in the mix for a given asset. They're driven by their economic incentives to exploit that asset, look for sync placements, look for opportunities for their catalog, because that's what generates money for them in the form of increased royalty distributions.
Right. And we talked about, and Dayton touched on just now, those fees they can incur. That is a drawback, but it gives you the strength of the publisher. And as we looked at earlier, that strength can be substantial and can lead to a much higher level of earnings for any given catalog. So it's definitely something worth considering and worth owning. Riding the coattails of majors is a good thing. So now we get into our Q&A side. Oh, sorry. Actually, Rob, if you have anything else that you wanted to add to this stuff before we get into our Q&A.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, great. All right, so I see there's a couple submitted questions here, which we'll touch on first, and then I'll leave all of you attendees for a few minutes to formulate any questions you might have, and then we'll go through our submitted questions. There were a bunch. So a few from Bo here. Is there any auctions done on certain days, or is everything bidding on the exchange? So how we list a catalog is up to that rights holder and what they want to do. So we always offer auctions, but more often than not, a given seller would prefer a listing on the exchange. So you may see auctions. They're not done on a certain day. It's on request by a seller. So yeah, we'll still do them. They're just less frequent. Can you send us a copy of this Zoom so we can watch it again? Yes, we are recording. The recording will be reposted. We have a section on our blog page dedicated to these webinars, and so you can find it there. And then last one here, how do you know, or how can we check when a publisher takes over a catalog? Great question. So a catalog changing publishers, I would say, is pretty rare. It's kind of like pulling teeth, and changing everything over is a big ask. So it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And as we saw before, it can have a big impact. The only way we would know about it happening is if a seller moved forward with a change, because they'd have to notify us, since we'd be receiving the royalties from whichever company. We'd have to know where the royalties are then coming from, where the reassignment's going to. In a lot of our contracts, we do not allow for sellers to do changes like that. Rob, forgive me if I'm mistaken there.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to make a point that you can tell in almost every case that who a publisher is for any particular writer. So the MLC is a couple of years ago, relatively new organization, and kind of part of their job is to maintain a public database of who the songwriters and publishers are for each song and which recordings those are tied to. So if you go to the MLC.com, you can look at the repertoire, so you can see who is responsible for administering the composition copyrights, and you can see who the publisher is at that moment. Now, you won't be able to tell when they took over or when it happened. The example that we gave on the presentation, we knew because we ultimately took over the publishing administration and had Cobalt handle that for us. But from a timing perspective, I don't think you'd be able to find it in any sort of public way.
Yeah, like we said, it's not an easy process in a lot of cases. So it can sometimes be a tough ask. And more often than not, a lot of these prominent catalogs are already with major publishers, and so they wouldn't want to do a change. What we saw there was a very small publisher going to a very big publishing admin, so a pretty tangible impact. But it was a good highlight for the strength that a publisher can offer to a catalog. What's the minimum the author needs to earn per year to put in the auction? So for a listing for us, the minimum earnings required is dependent on who the payor is. Just because as we looked at, different data can be easier or more difficult to analyze depending on what it is, where it's coming from, what the earnings are. So the minimum can vary. Our lowest minimum is what, like 1,500 earned in the last year from like a PRO like ASCAP or BMI. I think it's 1,500. Next one here. How is the dollar age of an asset calculated? Quinn, we actually have an article on our blog that breaks down the dollar age, provides the formula for how you calculate it, what goes into it, what gets weighted. I can send that to you, or I can actually, maybe I can just put it in the chat right now. I'd say take a look at that.
I'll grab it for you, John.
Oh, thank you, Rob. That's going to be the cleanest explanation for how dollar age is calculated, because it's a little bit of a complicated calculation. In a nutshell, we take the release date for a catalog, the earnings contributions for each song in the catalog, and depending on their contribution relative to their release date through the catalog as a whole is how we roughly calculate the dollar age, roughly. That has a couple other weighted factors thrown into it, but that's pretty rough. Dayton, anything I missed there?
Yeah, I would just say at the highest level, it's a weighted average of all ages of the tracks in a given catalog, driven by the age of the track against whatever the earnings were for that track over the last 12-month period.
So yeah, Quinn, Rob's gonna get you that dollar age article, which has the formula on it. So take a look at that. That will help a lot. And then I'm on your website. Where do I find investing in syndicates? Yes, our private syndicates. Unfortunately, right now there are no active available private syndicates, so there's no place to invest in them. They are all currently closed. If we were to have a new private syndicate opportunity come available, you can bet there would be a lot of communication going out surrounding it, making sure everyone's aware of the opportunity. So there is no way currently to invest in the syndicates unless a new one were to go live. We haven't done one in a few years, and I am not aware of any catalogs we currently have in the pipeline that would qualify for a syndicate. It's really only stuff that's in the several $1 million range that we would consider a syndicate. Okay, and that's the last submitted one here. Last call for submitted questions, and then we're going to get into our actual Q&A pre-submitted questions.
So that link to the dollar age, I think everyone will be able to see it if you go to the Q&A on the answered tab underneath Quinn's question. I typed the link, and if you can't see it, someone let me know. But I tried to put it in the chat, but I don't think it worked.
Here, let me see. All right, should be available there now.
Sweet.
Okay, so I'll give you all a minute to formulate any last questions here live, and then we'll get into the actual submitted questions. And then we're also going to change our slide here. Oh, that's the last one. All right, another one here. I'm new to this type of investment. How do I get started? Well, first I'd say get your account verified to purchase. Pretty simple. Submit a form, go through the steps. So once you're verified, that will give you access to purchase. We do have strict purchase timelines. So make sure you have the actual cash available before you make any purchases. Failure to meet the payment timelines can result in a ban more often than not. So yeah, once you're verified and set to go, then find an asset you like and make an offer. then it's just getting an offer locked in. That's all it takes to get started. Just as a word to the wise, I'd say read all the literature we have on royalties so you really understand what you're buying. Watch our prior webinars. There's oftentimes good questions that are raised that can help provide you context in what you're looking at. So yeah, educate yourself on royalties, and then good luck. Robert Dayton, any other recommendations for Alexia?
Yeah, reiterate, just take advantage of all the free information that we have on the blog. There's tons of articles geared at investors, and certainly folks that are new to music and royalties. And,
Yeah.
and then every transaction on Royalty Exchange is public. You can look at the active listings and kind of see what the trends are and what investors are bidding. So there's just a ton of information there for you, and we're always a good resource as well. So feel free to reach out if any questions pop up.
Yeah, we have our investors email on the bottom here. So take advantage of that. Another one from Quinn. Is there any reason Royalty Exchange doesn't work with Harry Fox? I believe they do not allow for assignments, Rob.
Honestly, they've kind of taken a back seat to the MLC. Really, they were mostly an aggregator of mechanical royalties. And now that streaming is kind of driving the vast majority of mechanicals, the MLC has kind of taken over. I know they work together on the repertories, but they were more of an aggregator that they would ultimately pay. They would collect mechanical royalties and pay them through to the publishers. So we would be seeing their work come through on the publishing assets. So there wouldn't be a really reason to do any sort of direct assignment with them. And again, they don't have as big of a part now that the MLC is taken over for streaming mechanicals.
Cool. All right, again, last call before we move on to submitted questions. And there are quite a few. We've covered a bunch of these already, but there's some good ones in here. All right, I'm just going to move us on to the submitted questions. Feel free to submit stuff through the Q&A. We can always revisit that, but I do want to keep moving along here. So first question we have here, can investors purchase royalties on the master/sound recording side? Yes, you can. We do include those assets. It's just the composition side is more common. 2, how do investors get paid? Through us, Royalty Exchange. We will admin the royalty payments for assets you buy with us. That's free. It's free service. There's no take, there's no fee, there's nothing. We act as the administrator so that we can effectively custody the overall market. It makes the assignments easier. It makes everyone's life easier. We can help troubleshoot any issues. We can look into what's going on. In many cases, we are contractually required to act as the administrator. If, say, for example, a seller only sells 20% of their royalty holdings, but in order to do the sale, it all has to come from a single place. Well, then we would be the admin and pay both the buyer and the seller based on the terms of the sale. So there's a lot of reasons why we do that for free, but we do. Next question here. How do we use these newly acquired assets? Are there limits or requirements to using these assets? Great question. And yes, there are limits. You are not allowed to do anything. You do not own the copyrights. You do not have licensing control. This is just a passive interest in the royalties, which is why, again, those publishers are so valuable. You don't have to do anything. They do all the work for you. So yes, there are limits and you cannot use the assets. I have heard some creative ideas from investors on how to, let's say, cultivate the royalties, whether that's, curating their own playlists. There was one guy I talked to who owned a bunch of nightclubs, and he was planning on buying pop catalogs and playing those tracks in his nightclubs. So you can get creative with it as long as you aren't breaching copyrights and usage laws, should be fine. But you do not have the right to market, use, re-record, etc. Rob, anything I'm missing there?
All good.
Cool. Next question here, terms of sale options. Yes, we offer a few different options as far as term lengths. Obviously, we have our life of rights We also offer 10-year deals and 30-year deals. And then we also offer a fixed return amount, which is kind of like an advance, where you are guaranteed a set return amount. And then your only variability there is how long it takes to recoup. So
the term is dictated by the seller. The seller decides what they want the term to be, and then that is the asset that gets posted, and then investors bid on the term. It's already pre-populated.
Cool. Yes, that's a good point. You do not control it. The asset term is set. Next question here. Where are rates published? So that probably is dependent on the royalty rate you're talking about. A lot of this stuff can be found online. If you're referring to the CRB royalty rates, that's posted in a lot of different places. I would say you could look at the actual minutes from the meetings, probably be the most accurate, or the official judgments. Rob, do you have any suggestions for where to look at the royalty rates?
Yeah, if they're public, then it's the CRB rates if you're talking about that, but this is a little bit of a broad question to try to fully answer here.
Yeah, you can find it if you search. If you know what to search too, because the different rights types have different names. But yes, you can find a lot of that stuff if you search. Next question here. After a song is a hit, how do declines in streams tend to go? That's a good question. I'm not sure we could ascribe a typical behavior aside from our bell curve at the beginning and then strong decay after that. But we see that in a lot of places. I would say that the drop off from a hit, from its peak to its tail, I don't know, like 80 to 90% drop. Dayton, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say short answer, it varies. I'd say long answer, check your statement. Longer answer, it depends on the genre, I think, in a lot of ways, and also like the overall success of the track, how that track is being used. So like, what is a hit? Is a hit like a top 40 song? Is it a top 10 song? Is it the song of the summer? Is it a song that's getting placed in a bunch of commercials and TV shows? The life cycles of songs can vary significantly. What John said, if you're talking like peak to trough, the long tail of those streams, which you'll probably see realized, I'd say about 3 to 5 years, and then fully stabilized 7-ish years post release, in most cases, are going to be about 90-95% down from whatever the peak payout is going to look like. If we're talking about streaming, my view is streams tend to have a longer shelf life compared to other types of performances. So a song can have a life independent at streaming, or a life that is longer at streaming than it would, say, at radio. For example, it's also going to vary a bit by genre too. We talked about this with like the country catalog that we had taken a look at. That song is earning mostly off its streaming royalties at this point. It had a life at radio, it quickly fell off. Hip hop, you might have a catalog that is generating significant money from streaming that has no radio play, and that is continuous and stable over time. It's going to vary on an asset by asset basis.
Yeah. And yeah, asset and source, like you said. I think that covers it. We do have a submitted question here from Sean, which we'll cover quickly. Because Royalty Exchange handles the admin of payments, will Royalty Exchange publish data on royalties after an auction so investors can get a sense whether royalties are relatively constant after an asset is auctioned? Publish publicly or to the buyer?
Well, in either case, right? Like almost every asset that transacts on a royalty exchange gets put on the secondary market,
Right.
and
That was going to
automatically
be
updates, right?
the next thing I said, because an auction doesn't necessarily get relisted the same way that a listing on the exchange does. It's kind of relevant. If there is a active listing for the asset, yes, you will be able to review its ongoing performance. If there is not, then you will not unless you are the owner. Just like you couldn't review a house if it's not listed on Zillow or whatever. Same kind of way. It needs to have a listing to have the data.
Generally, our assets are relisted, right? So
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. So the
but they
default
don't
is
have
that
to
most
be.
assets are going to have that kind of data available.
Yeah. So you should be able to see it if there is an active listing. But we cannot guarantee that there will be an active listing for everything that transacts, because it's up to that owner if they want to have an active listing, and also our system's current capabilities, and if we can have an active listing on the exchange for whatever reason. So expect to be able to review that, but not always the case. All right, next one here. What are the don'ts for new investors? Don't buy things you can't afford. And then make sure you understand what you're buying. Those are the two biggest ones, I'd say. Dayton, Rob, do you have any other don'ts?
Nope, that's good.
Yeah. We have strict payment timelines. So if you're planning on buying something, make sure that you can pay for it. Pretty simple, straightforward. That's really the only don't. You'd be surprised how many people don't follow that rule. It's kind of shocking. What are the benefits of purchasing royalties from royalty exchange? Cash flow, passive income cash flow that's uncorrelated to traditional markets is probably the biggest. Aside from that, it's cool. I mean, how many people can say that they own royalties to Ed Sheeran, Drake, Rihanna, pick your artist, right? You are also buying a direct cash flow rather than a, portion of something like a dividend might be, or like a hypnosis catalog where you're getting not really royalties. I don't really know what I would call their payouts, but direct access to the cash flow, passive income, uncorrelated from traditional markets. Those are the biggest benefits in my purview. Dayton or Rob, do you guys have anything you want to?
Yeah, standardized terms. I think that's a huge thing that
Yeah.
we even kind of overlooked. We've built this marketplace over the last 7 years, and we know what works for both buyers and sellers. So it's really kind of a no hassle transaction. We handle all of the post assignment paperwork. You're bidding on the same terms as every other investor on the marketplace, in terms that the seller has already agreed to as well. You don't need to have a lawyer look over all the language of the contract and incur transactional expenses like that. It's really a standardized thing that we've built out over time and found what really works for everyone involved. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dave, do you have anything that you want to add to that list? Okay. All right. How does the royalties process work once a bid is placed? So the purchase process is very straightforward, like Rob said, because everything's standardized. So you place a bid gets accepted. Great. We have a transaction. So we'll send you agreements and invoices. Like we said, we have strict payment timelines. So pay for your asset in 2 business days via the terms on the invoice. Sign your purchase agreement, which is like your certificate of ownership, set up an account in our admin portal, and you're done. From there, just collect your royalties, which should happen automatically if you set yourself up in the admin portal. That's really it. It's a very straightforward, very easy process. And then if you ever wanted to sell, simply do so. Set a list price, field offers. You can request to be in our featured section as an asset owner. Which, obviously gets a bit more eyeball time for a lot of people. It's right at the top. So you have liquidity options, you have cash flow coming in. That's it. It's very, very straightforward. Any financing. So I have heard one successful case of an investor getting financing for royalty purchases. One. So it can happen. We do not offer it at Royalty Exchange. I would say if you are successful in acquiring financing to purchase royalty assets, let me know. I would love to increase that number to 2. But right now I've only heard one testimony where someone was successful. So kind of a yes and no answer there. Next one, can we use credit cards to purchase the listings? No, you cannot. Assets must be paid in cash. Wire transfers, ACH payments, that is acceptable. Credit card payments are not. What if you want to sell the listing in the middle of life of rights? You can do that. You can even sell a ongoing term listing. Just expect that the offers you get to be reflective of the remaining term. But we do offer liquidity through the exchange. So yes, you can resell anything that you buy on Royalty Exchange. Are the majority of your investors individuals? I'd say yes, just based on volume. But we have investors of all shapes, sizes, profiles, portfolio sizes, institutional, you name it. Are royalties taxed? Rob, you want to talk about taxes?
Yeah. In the US, they're taxed as ordinary income. You'll get a 1099 MISC. There's a box for royalties on there. So they're taxed as ordinary income in the US. And then based on, if you're not from the US, it'll be based on whatever the tax treaty is between your country of domicile and the US.
Great. Yeah, the tax question we always get. Legally, we cannot provide tax advice. So for any further clarification or details, talk to your tax advisor. All right, next one here. What's the minimum required investment amount? That's really up to you and what you are looking to buy. I say on the low end, expect assets to transact somewhere between 5 and 10K, but that can vary. Kind of depends on how the asset's doing, whether or not that will be lower or higher. So it's kind of up to you. How has the huge rise in interest rates affected transaction pricing? So we are largely uncorrelated from macroeconomic conditions, so we don't see much of a change at all in transaction pricing. The only difference I might point at is that, a lot of the investors on Royalty Exchange are financial professionals. And so for them, if cash is tighter, maybe they won't want to pay a higher multiple for something that they otherwise would. But that's a real reach of an answer. I couldn't stand by that because we haven't seen any evidence of it, honestly. Or I shouldn't say any evidence, but like not enough to formulate a real hypothesis on it. So yeah, we're pretty largely uncorrelated. Dayton or Rob, do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to touch on the Q&A that just come in because it discusses taxes. It talks about how the taxes work once you sell an asset at a gain. It is not part of a 1099. How you report the sale of that asset, you might have a couple options, and that's where we get into John's comment about we cannot give tax advice. So you do have a couple options on how to report that. You may be able to get capital gains, but again, that's something you want to check with your tax advisor on how you should and can report a sale of a royalty asset.
Cool. Perfect. Okay. All right, so we'll cover those two. That's great. Next one here. What resources can you direct an investor new to music royalties to in order to learn and invest with confidence? Go to our blog page. That is the best royalty investing library I can offer you. If you're looking for more than that, I would also say look at Songtrust's glossary of music royalty terms. I found that to be helpful, but it's just a glossary. Our resources are actually relevant to royalty investing. So the webinars, the guides, the walkthroughs, everything you'll find in our investor guide section. And then if you want to supplement it, go check out that glossary because I found it helpful too. Robert, Dayton, anything you guys would suggest?
Nope.
All right, what are some key signs to invest in a royalty? Do royalties indefinitely appreciate over time? Key signs to invest in a royalty. This sounds like a sneaky way for asking for investment advice. So we always say, look at the dollar age and the source income and the trend rates of the earnings. Look at that stuff and then decide if you like it. Also understanding, the term length, because you're not going to pay the same multiple for a 10-year term that you would for a life of rights asset. So, take that into account too. But the analysis and determining whether an asset is something you want to buy is up to you. We are not investment advisors, so we cannot tell you things to look at. It all depends on what your strategy is and what you like and what you want to buy. I would also say that royalties do not indefinitely appreciate, but it's pretty close. Just because they are inherently finite, there is inherently a limit, because the life of rights is not actually in perpetuity. But that being said, a $20 age catalog is definitely more valuable than a 1-year dollar age catalog, just because it's got proven earnings consistency that we can see. So they do appreciate. Just, I wouldn't say indefinitely. Dayton or Rob, anything you want to add to that? Cool. What is the best way to sell your royalties? Royalty exchange, definitely the best way. Biggest market, easiest approach, fairest pricing. Yeah. Would it be possible to get insight into how the analyst evaluations are made? Dayton, are you open to sharing any of your valuation methods?
Well, are we talking about the benchmark that appears on the listings, or
Let's go with the benchmark, which is really just a median, but also if anything that you wanted to add to that, like things that we consider. I mean, you already talked about how we remove outliers like big production sinks and things like that. So
in terms of forecasting the value of a royalty distribution, we talked about sinks, one-time payments. Important to look at the historic earnings to see if there are any outliers or likely non-repeating distribution events. So say that can be a settlement relating to newly agreed upon license terms with a music user being paid out by a PRO. ASCAP had a license with Netflix. They negotiated a new license with Netflix. The rates increased on a retroactive basis. So they're going to pay out an adjustment for that. That's not going to recur. So you're going to want to make sure that if you're valuing a royalty asset, that you'd want to account for that kind of distribution event not occurring in future periods. The dollar age of the asset, as John touched on, we find that's a pretty powerful indicator of the value of future distributions. A catalog or a song of a higher dollar age that has a higher probability of recurring similar level distributions in the future. So if you're talking about stuff that's 10, 15, 20 years old, evergreen tracks, stuff that has enduring appeal, there's going to be an audience that's built in for that, that's going to continue on for a long period of time and is going to cross over between different mediums of music consumption. We've already seen audiences move from radio over to streaming. That's going to continue into the future. And they're going to be following those tracks onto that new platform as they go on. So that's a powerful indicator. The sources of the earnings we touched on, is that money coming from mechanical, which is likely to be benefiting from a increase in the rates for a retroactive and for a future distribution basis? Is it coming from performance, which is going to be more consistent? Is it coming from sync, which you can't count on as much? Valuing those. And then for the benchmark, if we're touching on that, that is a function of the median for similar asset transactions when we're looking at dollar age and at the term for that transaction. So that's based on prior sale history.
And we call that a benchmark because it is purely and truly a benchmark. The intrinsic value of any asset could be higher or lower than that, depending on everything Dayton just touched on, all the factors that make up the catalog itself. Okay, next one here. Has the new streaming rates gone into effect yet? If so, do we know what rate was settled upon? So we do not know the timeline of the new rates, unless there's been some update that I missed. That has not been released yet. We do know the ultimate settled upon rate, which I believe was 15.35%.
It's 15.1. It's a stepwise increase up to 15.1 for the prior period. So with the CRB rates, there's two pieces with this. There was a rate court decision regarding retroactive rates for 2018 through 2022. That was being paid out on an interim basis of 10.1%. The rate court decided that it would be up to 15.1% for that 2022 year rate period. So there's going to be an adjustment that is addressing those prior periods. Then there is a separate rate court decision regarding rates for the next 5-year period from 23 through 2027, and that is an increase up to 15.35%.
Right.
So, as John said, those decisions have been made. It's a question of when that money is going to be coming through the distributions as it's paid by the MLC. As of the most recent stuff that I've seen, my understanding is the DSPs are still working with the rate court to try to come to a schedule that works for them when they can address these retroactive adjustments and address the higher rates. It sounds like they're not in a position to cover those retroactive periods based on the change in the value from what they were paying on an interim basis. So it may be a while. It's something that we're keeping an eye on. And once we see that, we'll put out some more information for our investors to make them aware that these increased rates are coming. We know they are coming. We just don't know over what timeline.
Yeah. So we keep a close eye. And I believe it's going to be an incremental increase, right? For the years that are being adjusted.
For the retroactive, I would imagine that's coming through all at once or coming through in some kind of schedule, because that was a stepwise increase. I forget the percentage year to year, but you're going from 10.1% in like the on the interim rate basis, increasing incrementally up to 15.1% for the final year of that 5-year term for the retroactive. For the go forward payments, it's a similar stepwise increase, but you're only going up from 15.1% to 15.35%. So a much smaller incremental gain year to year.
All right. Are there ways that royalties will adjust and increase payout to compensate for inflation? Robert, Dayton, any of you guys have thoughts on inflation, how it impacts royalties?
Yeah, I think when earnings are derived from sources that come from revenue, so say like streaming mechanicals, they get a piece, you get a piece of the streaming services actual revenue. Those are the prices that they charge their users, probably advertisers as well. Those are all going to kind of take into account inflation. That's the one that's popping up in my head right now.
Yeah, to touch on Rob's point, you can Google and do some research on, I think the kind of the consternation with a lot of music companies and the DSPs pricing models over time. I think that's changed recently with Apple Music, Spotify, either implementing or looking into changing some of the rates for their different packages for subscribers. And that's a revenue-based royalty in many cases. So you're going to see that increased pricing reflected in increased revenue for those services, most likely, which then translates into a higher royalty from the DSPs. If we're talking about, say, like performance revenue, you won't see the effect of inflation for any royalties where the rates are based on a fixed percentage, right? Because they're just taking like X amount of whatever is being paid through for a certain type of usage. So you can think of mechanical rates, like for physical, for example. Like the historic rate was like 9.1 cents per, copy of an album being sold, or some, fraction of a cent for every stream that was going through. So those would not be changing in the face of inflation. That, those kind of fixed rate payments for royalties can actually have like a somewhat deflationary effect, because the value of money is increasing over time, but because those rates are fixed, the amount of royalties is not changing in line with that.
Great. Okay, next one here. How long does it take to receive your ROI, and is it given monthly, or when is it given? Well, with our new feature that went live today, you can take a look at your return today for assets you own. Just click on the little button on your listing where it says view my return, and you can click those numbers right now. So we would update that every time there's a distribution. So how that gets updated kind of depends on the asset you own and how frequently it gets paid. So since stuff is more often than not paid quarterly, I would say expect it to update quarterly, but we'll keep it as up to date as possible just because our system is automatically updating. And then we'll talk about litigation. How are the purchasers of music assets insulated from litigation from owners and artists who believe they deserve the royalties? Rob, you want to talk about our diligence process?
Yeah, sure. So any asset you see on Royalty Exchange, we would have done some background due diligence to verify that the asset can be sold. So what does that mean is we talk to each seller, we determine that they are who they say they are, that they own what they say they own, and they have the ability to sell it. So that involves contacting their distributor as well, making sure that there's no active disputes on any of the works in their catalog. We do an asset check for any lien that might need to be satisfied through the sale. And so once we get verification of those three things, then we can put an asset on the site. Now, insulated from litigation from maybe a third party, you, as an investor, really what you're buying is the right to one specific person or entity's share of royalties. So if a third party came and said that person was not entitled to the royalties, I suppose they could lump in the person that is still collecting it, but that is collecting it at that time. But you really didn't have any privity of contract with that person, and at that point you would have recourse in your purchase agreement. You can check the purchase agreement. It's linked in our terms of use. It gives you a cause of action in case any of the representations that the seller of the royalty stream is making is, basically, do they own what they say they own? And if that were to come to pass, then you would have a contractual claim against the seller.
Cool. So yeah, you have options. Next one's kind of related. How does enforcement occur in cases of underreporting and underpayment? Well, I do know that there are companies out there who focus on underreporting or underreported catalogs, but Rob, do you know more about this?
Yeah, this one's a little tougher. It's hard for us to know what we're seeing is every single thing that could be reported. We're taking the data directly from each of the distributors, and oftentimes our investor or us do not have an audit right of those royalty streams. Now we can get some insight if a payment were to drop off and try to get some explanation, and that's where we kind of handle from the admin perspective, checking with the distributor, saying, hey, this looks a little off. Can you tell us what happened? And then we can kind of get involved and help resolve that piece. But having an actual audit right is very rare in the royalty exchange transactions.
Cool. All right, next one here. I'm not sure what this is asking. Can you explain the AFM SAG-AFTRA fund?
Yeah, so what that is it's a fund that is basically collected from streaming and paid to background vocalists, session musicians. If you're familiar with Sound Exchange, their job is to collect non-interactive digital performance royalties, and they have 5% of streaming royalties. So what that is like Sirius XM, Pandora, anything that kind of acts like a radio station but is not a radio station. So they collect 5% of those royalties, send them to SAG-AFTRA, and then SAG-AFTRA finds the background musician. So maybe someone who wasn't credited as a featured performer or a songwriter. There's still this fund here where they can pay out other interested parties that participated in the recording of a song.
Cool. Next one here, looking to build a modest portfolio of royalties, maybe 150K. Looking at usual prices, that seems unlikely. Would you agree? I actually wholeheartedly disagree. I think that you could build a very strong portfolio with 150K. You get 5 different 30K assets. And I think that you could have a lot of success with that. Alternatively, if you buy one inherently diversified life of rights catalog for 150K, that could be solid too. But, general investment principles point to diversify over many assets rather than one. So yeah, I think it's very possible, especially on royalty exchange. Next question here. What is the long-term plan for a liquidity event for investors? Everyone's got a different plan, so we can't really answer this question directly. Some investors have no liquidity event planned, and they just want to collect as long as they can on the cash flow, which I understand. I expect that this may change for many people when they start to see what kinds of returns they're getting for some of the offers that are being made. I mean, just recently we had an investor who made a 800% plus return from a sale he did on royalty exchange. So if you can walk away from an offer like that, then hey, more power to you, but it's hard to argue with an 800% return on investment. So yeah, we'll kind of see how this evolves with the new features that we've added. Some competitors are offering segments of royalties as a more affordable option for retail investors. Is royalty exchange? So no, we are not. What you are referring to is effectively securitizing a royalty interest. And what we offer on royalty exchange is not a securitized interest. Rob, you want to talk a little bit more extensively about this and why we don't do fragmented ownership?
Yeah, so what we do is we sell an asset on a one-to-one basis from one buyer or one seller to one buyer. And we did touch a little bit earlier about the private placements. We did do a few of those where we did break up one asset into multiple different segments. We don't do that very often. So everything you see on the site is one asset that is for sale. It helped us to be able to scale these things without having to do a private placement for a securitized royalty stream. It's just much easier for these things to transact and for the administration as well.
Yeah, I would also argue that the returns you get for these direct ownerships are pretty staggeringly better than what you get for the fractionalized. When you calculate out how much of a return you get for the fractionalized ownership, like it oftentimes ends up being like 4 or 5%, if that. On royalty exchange, we're seeing an average like a 13% return. So it's just the returns are better from everything I've seen. But yeah. Okay, next one here. Can you provide projections for the future? No, we cannot. We do not make projections, claims, guarantees on the future performance of royalty assets. We do not know what they're going to do. Past performance is no indication of future success. However, we can divine certain trends and behaviors by looking at the historical earnings, but we will not provide projections because we don't know what's going to happen. Next one here. How does a 360 deal work? Rob, you want to talk about pub deals and record label deals?
It doesn't really apply to royalty exchanges particularly, but I think these are kind of in vogue probably, I don't know, 15 years ago. where you would find a songwriter performer, and the publisher would basically act as both the publisher and label and handle all the touring, basically handle all the aspects of an artist's career, rather than having an artist sign with one specific publisher and have a different record label release it and then have someone else handle touring. Does not really come into play much for what royalty exchange does.
Yeah. As I understand it, the trade-off with the 360 deal is you get a huge lump sum advance, but then whoever you did the 360 deal with collects everything from all sides instead of you for the royalties moving forward. So that's why they call it 360, because it's all surrounding residual payments, basically. And that's where you hear, how like the famous horror stories of how artists got screwed by a label because they did a 360 deal and missed out on a bunch of money. But like Rob said, that doesn't really apply to what we're doing here. Next question: how much delay in months is there between when people listen to a song and when you get paid? I'd say that depends on the company that's providing royalty payments, because they all have different reporting styles and schedules. Normally it's like 1 quarter, roughly. Maybe 2, Dayton.
Yeah, I would say to John's point, it depends. If we're talking about digital distributors and that royalty is based on streams on DSPs, you could get that money in like a month or so.
Yeah, I'd say 2 months for DSPs normally, something like that.
It depends on when they report, and DSPs even report differently too. Some DSPs will, invoice and pay money out like sort of on an ongoing basis. Some will make monthly payments. If we're talking about the PROs, that can be 6 to 9 months between performance, when that's processed, when that's paid out, and the distribution. And I would expect a similar lag time if we're also talking about publishers and labels when they pay out their own royalties.
Yeah. And then second half of this, is it worth paying $6K to upgrade? I assume you're talking about the all access membership. That depends on how active you're planning on being. That's more of a individual conversation, depending on what your capital allocation is, what your strategy is, what you're looking to get accomplished. That's when we talk about whether you wanted to upgrade to the membership. It makes sense for some people, doesn't make sense for others. If you wanted to have that conversation, whoever submitted this question and you're here, send us an email and we can set up a call. Next one here. What is the panel's thoughts on the next 2 years regarding technology being implemented, such as new Web3 apps? So Dayton, I know you and I have had a bunch of fun conversations surrounding this topic. It is my opinion that the implementation of these new technologies, these new, let's call them storefronts, and places to hang out, life needs a soundtrack. Where there's a soundtrack, there's royalties. So I am of the belief that these new technologies, these new apps, is just more opportunity for music consumption, which means more royalties, which means more growth. It's my opinion. Dayton, Rob?
I think of anything else to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, the more places that exist, whether they're physical or virtual, there's music's going to find their way into it, and that's good for everybody.
Yeah. Like, have you ever tried watching a movie without any music playing, just the words and the picture? It's weird. Yeah, music is everywhere in everything, and I don't think that's going to change. Okay. Next one here. A buyer purchases a listing with multiple songs. Will you allow this buyer to sell individual songs on the exchange? Great question. Rob, will you talk about why we don't do this and what are the instances in which we could or could not offer this?
Well, I think if we're already admitting for it, you could split up an asset and sell it if it met the criteria for the size and the performance.
So you can. We tend to stay away from it because there's an argument that can be made for fractionalizing the asset, but like Rob said, since we're the admin and we're the single source, a case can be made to split it out. It's not something we do very often. But yeah, if this is something you want to do, ask us. We like to say nothing's a no until we've had a conversation about it. So we'll always take a look. We'll see what's possible. And yeah, let us know if that's something that you wanted to do. Last question here. How long would I get royalties? Can I sell them after my purchase expires? This one sounds like it's in reference to a limited term asset and when they end. So when a term for an asset ends, if there is a set term, those rights automatically revert back to the original seller of that intellectual property. There is no return of capital or anything like that. You are paying for the right to collect the royalties. So you should factor in the royalties you collect into your return scenario, and also when determining what offer to make, because there's no guarantee that you will get back the amount that you put in. That should be part of your investment thesis. So you cannot sell them after your purchase expires. Once it expires, the asset is gone. Okay, and that covers it for our submitted questions. That should be everything. If I missed something, for anyone that's still here, I'll give you another minute here to submit any last questions. Otherwise, we're going to call this a wrap. So I'll just give you guys a minute. If nothing else, then yeah, we'll be all set. And it's times like now, I wish I had a soundboard for Jeopardy music or something to play, but we got to pay royalties on that. So. Okay, questions, last questions. Has royalty exchange ever worked within a state? Yes, we have, in many different capacities. Yes, we have. Is there a follow-up question to the estate question? Because there's a lot of different ways that I could get into that. We have sold assets from an estate on the site, but that's not the only way in which we have engaged with estates. All right, last questions going once. Last questions going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Again, my name is John Gestel. I am our client relations coordinator. Dayton O'Connor, our lead analyst, and Rob Bernhardt, our corporate counsel. If you have any further questions that didn't come to you during this webinar, reach out to us. You should know how to reach me. Always investors@royaltyexchange.com. Welcome to call in, chat in. We are happy to answer your questions. If you wanted to schedule a one-on-one call, we offer that too. Again, just email us at investors@, and we are happy to help you as we can. Thank you all again for attending. We will have this recording posted on the site. Have a happy Valentine's Day and a good rest of your week, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, everybody.